Good Tuesday afternoon to each and every one of you. Welcome to Walking Through History. My name is Nick Angel, and with me is Alan Seenestray. We are excited about continuing our study in the book of Joshua today. We have been working our way through from the Jordan westward as the children of Israel are making their conquest into the land of Canaan. Last week, we talked about Jericho and the great victory that was achieved at this great fortified city. And yet it was followed very quickly by a resounding defeat to a much lesser opponent in the people of Ai. We read in chapter 7 why that defeat took place was because of the sin of Achan. That was rectified and dealt with towards the end of the chapter. And now they're going to have another shot at Ai. That's what we're going to read today from Joshua chapter 8. We're going to read the second attempt of overcoming Ai, how it was accomplished, and what the children of Israel did following that as they have a renewal of their commitment to the law. We're going to be getting into that today here in Joshua chapter 8. Thank you for joining us. Hope that you are enjoying this beautiful, at least in Jackson, a beautiful yet cold Tuesday. It's nice to have the heat kicked on, have the sweaters on and staying warm, and hope that you are nice and warm wherever you are. Maybe have a little bit of coffee, hot chocolate with you. Hope you have a Bible and that you'll open it up and join us here in Joshua chapter 8, or just follow along on the screen as we share the text, and also a map here in a little bit. Kind of give us a little bit of a visual layout of what we've been doing here in Joshua thus far. Thank you again so much for joining us. And again, I want to thank my good friend Alan being with us again today. Alan, I know you are busy with a lot of things going on in your life. Thank you for taking some time in your busy schedule to study along with us today here as we walk through Joshua chapter 8.
Yeah, we're right in the middle of moving right now, so it's a little bit hectic, but I definitely have a little more space than I used to with office and work and everything. We've gotten a lot of stuff out of the house, so now I got a little more room to work with.
Hey, we're glad to hear that, and we hope that things are going well with you, that Melanie and the kiddos are all doing well. We appreciate, again, the time that you're giving us today as we're walking through this text. Joshua chapter 8, beginning of verse 1. Again, this is following the sin of Achan, which led to this original defeat of Ai in Joshua chapter 7. That sin has been dealt with, and now it is time for them to get another crack at it. Joshua chapter 8 tells us that the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid or discouraged." I think we might have heard that before. We'll talk about that in a minute. "Take all the troops with you and go and attack Ai. Look, I have handed over to you the king of Ai, his people, city, and land. Treat Ai and its king as you did Jericho and its king, except that you may plunder its spoil and livestock for yourself. Set an ambush behind the city." So Joshua and all the troops set out to attack Ai. Joshua selected 30,000 of his best soldiers and sent them out at night. He commanded them, "Pay attention. Lie in ambush behind the city, not too far from it, and all of you be ready. Then I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. When they come out against us, as they did the first time, we will flee from them, and they will come after us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will say, 'They are fleeing from us as before.' And while we are fleeing from them, you are to come out of your ambush and seize the city. The Lord your God will hand it over to you, and after taking the city, set it on fire. Follow the Lord's command. See that you do as I have ordered you." So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the ambush site and waited between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua, spent that night with the troops. Joshua started, verse 10, early the next morning and mobilized them. Then he and the elders of Israel led the troops up to Ai. All those who were with him went up and approached the city, arriving opposite Ai, and camped to the north of it, with a valley between them and the city. Now Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. The troops were stationed in this way: the main camp to the north of the city, its rear guard to the west of the city, and that night Joshua went into the valley. When the king of Ai saw the Israelites, the men of the city hurried and went out early in the morning so that he and all of his people could engage Israel in battle at a suitable place facing the Arabah. But he did not know there was an ambush waiting for him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten back by them and fled toward the wilderness. Then all the troops of Ai were summoned to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were drawn away from the city. Not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel, leaving the city exposed while they pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, verse 18, hold out the javelin in your hand toward Ai, for I will hand the city over to you. So Joshua held out his javelin toward it. And when he held out his hand, the men in ambush rose quickly from their position. They ran, entered the city, captured it, and immediately set it on fire. The men of Ai turned and looked back, and smoke from the city was rising to the sky, and they could not escape in any direction. And the troops who had fled to the wilderness now became the pursuers. When Joshua and all Israel saw that the men in ambush had captured the city and that smoke was rising from it, they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. Then men in ambush came out of the city against them, and the men of Ai were trapped between the Israelite forces, some on one side and some on the other. They struck them down until no survivor or fugitive remained, but they captured the city of Ai alive and captured the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing everyone living in Ai who had pursued them into the open country, and when every last one of them had fallen by the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with a sword. The total of those who fell that day, both men and women, was 12,000. All the people of Ai, Joshua did not draw back his hand that was holding the javelin until all the inhabitants of Ai were completely destroyed. Israel plundered only the cattle and spoil of that city for themselves, according to the Lord's command that he had given Joshua. Verse 28 says that Joshua burned Ai and left it a permanent ruin, still desolate today. He hung the body of the king of Ai on a tree until evening, and at sunset Joshua commanded that they take his body down from the tree. They threw it down at the entrance of the city gate and put a large pile of rocks over it, which still remains today. And at that time Joshua built an altar on Mount Ebal to the Lord, the God of Israel, just as Moses, the Lord's servant, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool has been used. Then they offered burnt offerings to the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings on it. There on the stones Joshua copied the law of Moses, which he had written in the presence of the Israelites. All Israel, resident, alien, and citizen alike, with their elders, officers, and judges, stood on either side of the Ark of the Lord's covenant, facing the Levitical priest who carried it. Half of them were in front of Mount Gerizim, and half in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the Lord's servant, had commanded earlier concerning the blessing of the people of Israel. Afterward, Joshua read aloud all the words of the law, the blessings as well as the curses, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read before the entire assembly of Israel, including the women, the dependents, and the resident aliens who lived among them. Alan, we have here in this text a great reversal in a number of different ways. A reversal from the previous chapter where this defeat had taken place at the hands of Ai. Just as a quick reminder, we go back to chapter 7. Remember, they've had this great victory in chapter 6 over Jericho, this extremely fortified city that seemed almost impenetrable. And yet here they go marching around the city. They blow the ram's horn trumpets, and the walls fall without them ever throwing the first stone or anything in that nature. They're able to go in and overcome. And yet, if we are comparing this chapter here, chapter 8 with chapter 6, there's something that stands out as being very different, and that's in verse 2. He says in verse 2 of chapter 8, treat Ai, the Lord says to Joshua, treat Ai and its kings as you did Jericho and its king, meaning completely destroy them, except that you may plunder its spoil and livestock for yourselves. That's different from chapter 6, because in chapter 6, he said, do not take anything for yourselves, which brings chapter 7 into play with the mistake that Achan made, the sin he committed by disobeying that command of God, which led to the original defeat at the hands of Ai until this sin was rectified with Achan being judged and punished by death. Here, Alan, we really do just have everything reversed. everything that went bad in chapter 7 is turned on its head and ends in a very good way here in chapter 8. What all reversals do you see taking place here? And what do you think about this particular plan of attack that the Lord gives Joshua here? And how does that play in with what we saw in chapter 7?
Well, it definitely is a contrast with the campaign around Jericho. That one didn't seem to make much military sense. And as we looked at it, we could see there was more about there was other things happening. That was the reasons for the marching. Well, here you seem to, I mean, we've gotten more detail about this battle than even the Battle of Jericho. And really, I think this is the most detailed battle maybe in the entire Bible, just in terms of all the nuances that occurred. And I find it interesting that you just see there's in this part of Joshua, we're going to see several different battles, and they're all won in just different ways. And this one seems to be a little more, like a military, thought through type of thing. And then others are just, straight up like miracles of God. Not that this is any less of God has any less of a hand in this. I mean, he clearly does, but it just shows that, God can bring victory for them in any way that he chooses. And I think he uses AI's confidence against them. They had defeated them before, so they probably think we can beat them again. So that's why they were able to draw them out. So that might be part of it, just kind of more of a humiliation against AI's confidence and, self-assurance. And it's good that you see a bit of a contrast with the first time. You see the first time that Joshua just said, it's a small city, send about 3,000 people, and that should be enough. The Israelites were the ones that were overconfident and did not consult the Lord. Well, now you have that reversal. They send a stronger force against them, and of course they're obeying God's commands and everything that he says. It's the Lord telling them how to go about this campaign and everything. I thought verse 2 was interesting, just for thinking back to the story of Achan. He saw all that plunder and took some of it. If he'd have just waited, I assume this is probably maybe a few days later, maybe a few weeks later. If he just waited a little bit longer, he could have gotten the spoil without the punishment. He would just had to be patient. Clearly there, you saw that, you're going to get more victories. So just wait a little bit longer is all you had to do. But of course that didn't happen. But again, just a complete reversal of what happened before. There's a complete victory here. Of course, brought about by God in a completely different way, but no less by the hand of God.
So Alan, let me get your thinking on this. What I read to begin with is in verse 3, Joshua selects 30,000 men, right? That seems to be the base number he begins with. The other number that we see here is 5,000 men. The 5,000 men seem to be the ambush group. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 5,000 were the ones kind of hiding. The 20 seems like, I guess the 25 might have been the ones to face the city and then flee and draw them out.
Right. I think I'm seeing that the same way you are then, because it's a little confusing. Just the way it's laid out. It's not laid out in extremely clear order. It seems to be a little bit of it kind of gives the idea and the plan of what they're going to do in, say, 3 through 9, and then 10 through 13 seems to be them actually going through and doing it. So that first part seems to be the plan, and then 10 through 13 is actually the carrying out of it. Do you see that as well? Because listening and reading on this, some people had different ideas on exactly how this went down, if this was a two-wave attack, or if this was one time where this attack is carried out. I see it as one time, starting with the 30,000, which is big difference from what we saw, as you mentioned. I think they only took 3,000 back in chapter 7 of verse 4.
Yeah.
So they multiply their number by 10. The 5,000 go in the ambush position, and the 25 go up against AI, which which must have been very strange from Ai's perspective. They're thinking, we defeated these people once with only 3,000. Now they've sent this 25,000 number, which must have looked like just an enormous change from their perspective. So many more coming against them. And yet, as soon as they start to battle, they run away again. Ai's thinking, man, these Israelites, they're really not all that much from what we've heard of them with the great victory they had at Jericho. Look, they're running scared for their lives. And yet, as you said, I think you said that really well. I think the Lord here is seeing the arrogance of Ai, using that against them. Now, look, we're able to pursue them like we were before. Let's see here. Where did it? It says it somewhere here. Yeah, then 16, then all the troops of Ai were sent to pursue them, and Joshua, and they pursued Joshua and drawn away from the city. Not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So it's not just Ai that's being involved in this conflict, but the city of Bethel is involved as well, which I think you have a map, Alan, that shows it's kind of a little bit of the geography of where this is taking place. So we have pretty good directions giving here that Bethel seems to be to the west of Ai, which we could see on the screen here. And there would have been some distance between Bethel and Ai. And seems like the ambush grouping of soldiers, the 5,000, they had settled somewhere in a valley of sorts between these two cities, and that's how they were able to hide.
Yeah, but they're both. I mean, they're neighbors, so that's why I think you see Bethel and Ai kind of interchanged a little bit. I mean, they're basically, you can see they're right on top of each other, so can't be more than a mile between them or something, maybe 2.
Right, and then it makes me think too. I'm just trying to think. Imagine this in my mind. How do you hide 5,000 people? I mean, that just seems like a massive amount of soldiers to be able to hide. But the fact that there's a valley would be with the lower, the ground being so much lower, you could probably hide a great number of people down in such a place, which again is really good military strategy. I like that point that you made, that the Lord in this conquest, he's not just using miraculous means in order to defeat these enemies, but he's also just showing very sound military strategy at some points. This is just a really good military strategy. You've already gone up against this group once, and they had a great victory over you. Their confidence is really high. You come up against them again. If you run away from them, that confidence that they had is going to motivate them to pursue you, to maybe just finish you off once and for all. And then you just kind of sneak in behind them, take care of the city while it's unguarded, Ai and Bethel. And then once they see the smoke coming from the city, they turn around. Well, then you've got them sandwiched, and you can attack them from both sides. It just is, I mean, it's a great game plan that we have going on here. But it also brought to my mind a couple of other instances, Alan. I was thinking specifically where it says in verse 18 that the Lord said to Joshua, hold out the javelin in your hand toward Ai, or I will hand the city over to you. So Joshua held out his javelin toward it, and when he held out the hand, the men in ambush rose quickly from their position. They ran into the city, captured it, and immediately set it on fire. This is not the only time we've seen a leader of Israel in a battle scenario raising up a staff of some sort, which gives them an ability to overcome a battle. Can you think of some places where we've seen that before, Alan? There's one that came to my mind, and another one that I heard that I had not thought of.
The best one, or I think the equivalent one you're probably thinking of, is that first battle after the Red Sea, when the Amalekites came out and attacked the Israelites, and that's where Moses had to he held his hands up the entire time. And as long as his hands were held up, they were victorious. And then when he dropped them, they would lose. So he had two men stand beside him and hold his hands out. So you kind of get that similar effect right here, which Joshua was the leader in that battle as well on the ground. So he was a part of that. Now he's the one holding up the hand or holding up the javelin. You might be thinking too of the Red Sea crossing.
Yeah, that's the one that came to my mind first of all, especially the imagery of the enemy being in the middle, and you have kind of this wall of soldiers closing in around them and just kind of swallowing them up. That's what I thought of. But the battle against the Amalekites, that was another instance with the raising up of the hands.
So, but I love little things like that, because even though we see this, like you said, the military strategy being played out here, there's clearly God's control in the process. And I mean, there's nothing special about Joshua's javelin or Joshua's hand, but just the fact that he is the weapon that the Lord uses. So he holds that out. I think it says he holds it out the entire day, much like Moses had to as well. So, oh yeah, Joshua did not, verse 26, did not draw back his hand that was holding the javelin until all the inhabitants of Ai were completely destroyed, which, thinking a little bit bigger picture, you wish that Israel's hand was that strong against the Canaanites as a whole over the next, several chapters. Which we obviously know that they had great victories, but they did not complete the conquering of the land, and that's what leads us into Judges. They did not they drew their hand back, if you will, and they did not continue to defeat and to win until all the inhabitants were completely destroyed. So this is a good example of what they're supposed to be doing, and then obviously that doesn't continue over the next several chapters and into the Judges.
Right, and something else I think this does, this Joshua holding out his javelin and the army of Israel having success, I think what it does as well is it fulfills what God told Joshua back in chapter 3 and verse 7, when the Lord spoke to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses." We've seen, I think this is at least the second time, I can't recall the first time where I made this observation, somewhere in one of the previous chapters. But here we have Joshua again following in Moses' footsteps in a pretty specific way, having an influence on this battle in the same way, which again, I think is the Lord going back and fulfilling what he said back in chapter 3, verse 7, "I will exalt you as I exalted Moses. I will have you in a similar position where people will know that I am with you, just as I was with him." Which, bringing up Moses, Alan, takes us to the end of the chapter, which is a renewal of the covenant that is had here, a covenant ceremony, which Moses, who we were just spoken of, initiated back in Deuteronomy chapter 27. And a lot of specifics are similar here, specifically the altar being built from stones that had not been cut with an iron tool. It is very, very natural process, organic, you might say, where there's not really influence of man upon these stones, but that it is built. What other specifics do you see in here, Alan, that stand out to you? And do you see anything here that might have a little foreshadowing to our next chapter in chapter 9? Do you see anything here? What you got?
Well, definitely looking back at Deuteronomy 27 is kind of what it's talking about. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses. Well, it mentions in Deuteronomy 27, it mentions Mount Ebal and where they were supposed to go to build an altar, how the altar should be built, uncut stones. So not, just they find the stones. They're not, not desecrated, I guess, with saws or whatever they use to cut it, offering burnt offerings. It even mentions in Deuteronomy how Moses copied the law onto stones. And then we see here Joshua copying the law on these stones as well, which is also kind of reminds us of the rules for the king to make a copy of the law and reference it all the days of his life. So as far as I know, this is the only ruler of Israel that ever does that, Joshua here. So even we don't really have record of David or anybody else actually doing that. But it's interesting that it mentions even the resident aliens, and it mentions them twice, I think, down here in 33 and 35. So seems to be we don't talk about that much, but there seems to be more than just Israelites there. You have other nations, other peoples that have latched on, joined in. Obviously, people like Rahab would be involved with that.
Yes, right.
And maybe, some of Moses' relatives from Midian might be part of that too. But we always tend to think this is just Israelites, but I mean, the point of Israel was to kind of spread the message of God throughout the world. So you do see that happening. It's just kind of, you have to hunt for it a little bit in verses like this. But and then Joshua reads aloud all the words of the law, the blessings and curses, everything. There's not a word that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read before the entire assembly of Israel. So this is a reading much in the same way that in the book of Ezra we see them reading the law, which obviously would have taken a little while. But everyone, there's no excuse after this. Everyone is listening to the words of this law. There's no excuse that I didn't know about this law or that law. There's everyone's heard it now. So this is basically a covenant renewal ceremony. They're agreeing to these laws, which makes the breaking of these laws even more egregious later on.
Alan, do you have on your map there where this is, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim? Is this in the same area in this valley between Bethel and Ai? Do you know?
It's close. I think it's farther north here.
Because what this makes me think of, it goes back even further than Deuteronomy, Exodus. Takes me back even to Genesis 12. Mm-hmm. Genesis 12, let's see here in verse 6, it speaks of Abram passing through the land to the side of Shechem at the Mount of Moreh. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he builds an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So that happens there. But then it says, verse 8, that he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. He built an altar to the Lord there, and he called on the name of the Lord. It seems, if they're in the same area, kind of where this all takes place, that would be similar to where Abraham built an altar to God and called on his name there. If we're in a similar location, which best I can tell, not great with geography, seems to be about right. Do you see that as well?
Do you see my drawing on there?
Let's see here. Okay, right there. So
are you able to see my drawing? So
yes,
Bethel's
Bethel's
actually just west of Jericho. So it is a little bit farther south. It's not quite the same place. Shechem would have been.
Okay, I see. I got you now.
Yeah. So I mean, we're still talking, 10 miles apart.
Okay.
But down here you see the blow up of Shechem, and then the two mountains, which are pretty close. There's a valley separating them. So it would have been easy for, all the congregation to be on those two mountains, and then someone standing in the middle and actually be heard, just, like an amphitheater effect. So that was a good location for this type of thing. A little bit, not quite Bethel, but Shechem, if you remember, was where Jacob and his sons kind of settle in, and then they have all the issues with their sister, Dinah. And all that was Shechem right there. So, and then I think later on they moved down toward Bethel, a little bit farther south. So
it seems that Abraham moved from north to south in that movement in Genesis 12, and here it seems that Israel has moved from south to north. Am I seeing that correctly? That Abraham went from Shechem down south to Bethel and Ai, and here the people have gone from Bethel and Ai and moved north up to Shechem. Am I seeing that right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. And isn't that kind of neat too, to just think about the fact that where they are now, we've read about all these places already. We've already read of Abraham being in these locations, but having moved, and the Lord made the promise, I want to give this back to your descendants. And here is Israel now receiving the fulfilled promise that God had made. So that's just super cool to me to see the fulfillment and the people returning to the place that their forefather Abraham had been so many years prior.
Oh yeah. And as we continue, I mean, Bethel's going to pop up over and over again. Gilgal, obviously, places like Jerusalem. I mean, these places, there's a lot that happens over the course of the Bible. So right. It's good to, when you see the name of a place, do a quick search and see what else happened there, because it might shed some light on some nuance that we don't really recognize, because we don't remember the name of the place from before. But then when you remember the event that happened, you think, okay, I see the significance there.
Mhm.
So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it really is to see these places show up in completely different sections of Scripture. Albeit this is all kind of in the opening section of Scripture, it's still different writings, and with many years having separated where we first saw these locations with Abraham back in the early part of Genesis, and how we've returned back to these locations with his numerous descendants, this new mighty nation coming into to take hold of the land that God had promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit. And it's just super cool to see that. But you mentioned it earlier, Alan, and I think this leads into our next chapter that we'll study on Friday. But it mentions that all Israel, resident, alien, and citizen alike, that there were, as you mentioned, there were different people. Rahab, I think, is without a doubt someone we can mention as being a resident alien that was now living among Israel because of her help concerning Jericho. But I think there might have been some who came with them from Egypt that were still with them at this point. But we're going to see another group in Joshua chapter 9 find place among Israel, albeit by some deceptive means. But we're going to read and talk about the Gibeonites on Friday and how they play into the story with their interactions with Israel then. Alan, do you have anything else you want to bring up before we close out for today?
That was it. Just it's fun to get to this point and then look back and see, like we read in Deuteronomy, and it was pointing toward this moment right here of them standing on these mountains, and here they are, just as Moses predicted and God commanded.
Yeah, it continues to be made evident to us the faithfulness of God, that He's going to make a promise and He's going to fulfill that promise. We've seen that time and time again, even just throughout our reading and considerations of Joshua. Thank you, Alan, for your good insight. Thank you to each of you who have joined us for this study. Hope that it's been beneficial to you, that you have maybe gained some insight into the text that you have not noticed before. But more than anything else, being in God's Word, there are very few things, if any things, that we could be doing that can benefit us more in our faith than simply getting in the text, reading through the text, considering some of the nuances of it, and growing in our knowledge. Because as we always try to say and emphasize, we believe that the more we know of God's Word, the greater ability we have to have stronger faith and more trust in God as we live our own lives. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope that you're having a great Tuesday. Hope that you have a great rest of your Tuesday. If you're looking for a church to study with tomorrow night, we're going to be here at the church house, 384 Pleasant Plains Road at 7 o'clock, studying the Minor Prophets. We'll be talking about Jonah tomorrow night in our adult study. And then we also have Bible classes, preschool through high school tomorrow night that we're meeting as well. If you would like to join us, please feel free to. If you have any questions, reach out to us on our Facebook page or on our website. Just Google Pleasant Plains Church of Christ, Jackson, Tennessee. You'll find our website, Armor of God Online. Send us a message there, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. Again, thank you for joining us. Hope that you'll join us again on Friday as we continue our walk through history in Joshua chapter 9, talk about the Gibeonites and the part that they play in this story of God and His people and the conquest of Canaan. Alan, thank you so much again. Thank you to each of you who joined us. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and God bless you in all that you do.